you. Well, welcome. It's really great to see so many of you, which is fantastic for tonight's talk. And that's kind of thanks to Robin as well, because Robin has put us in touch with his brother Nick, and I'm going to give Nick his full title, Professor Nick Mansfield. So welcome tonight, and thank you for coming to give us this talk on the objects from 22 Ainsworth Street. Nick is a Labour historian whose research is based on 19th and 20th century British working class history, some of which we're now going to hear this evening, that's very, very close to our hearts, which is off of Mill Road. So welcome and thank you. So over to you, Nick and Robin.
Thank you. Sorry, I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah, thank you. We're going to be talking about a group of several score objects from a working class home that have been donated to the Museum of Cambridge. They were owned by Charles and Clara Crouch and some of their 9 children. This small collection is unusual in that it was owned by a Victorian, Edwardian, very poor working class family from East Cambridge, about whom we know quite a bit. The survival is so rare because it is so well documented and supplemented by family knowledge, documents and photographs. So we're going to be sharing it between Robin and I, and we're aiming to cover the working, political and cultural life of the Crouch family and discuss how it coped with the impact of economic hardship and war in the late 19th and 20th centuries. As I think we said in the blurb, Charles and Clara Crouch were our grandparents. Although they both died before I was born, Robin remembers Clara as when he was a small child. And we do have, I think, other members of the family here who may be able to contribute as well. I won't pick them out because I can't quite see all the participants as I'm doing this. Right, let's start. This is the biggest part of the collection, and it's a tea service given as a wedding present to Charles and Clara Crouch by Trinity College, for whom Charles worked. It wasn't used very much because it was kept in a cabinet, and there are about 10 cups and saucers, 10 square plates, a couple of large plates for bread and butter and cake, milk jug and sugar bowl. It's cream coloured with dark red floral design and wavy edges. Over to Robin.
Right, well, Charles Crouch on the left was a kitchen porter at Trinity College, and he regularly drank in the pub on the marketplace, which was the Wheatsheaf, and that is now the Gap clothes shop. That's where he met Clara, who was a barmaid working for her stepfather and her mother, and obviously they hit it off quite well, and they married in 1892 in St Matthew's Church, which is a church quite close to our own family. So as I said, they lived in a 2 up, 2 down terrace house. Well, actually it was 2.5, because there was a tiny room at the back which was used as a bedroom. And the story goes, my mother, there were 9 children and they had to sleep like sardines in a big double bed. So you can imagine what that was like, can't you? Their youngest child, of course, was my mother, and she has vague memories of her father. She was very young when he passed away. Okay, Nick.
Yeah, that's fine. Just two things I'd like to say. We think this is their wedding photo taken on their wedding day or just before their wedding day, and they do look very smart. They'd obviously made an effort to dress up for their wedding. You could almost say that Charles is imitated the dress of the young undergraduates for whom he worked, well, indirectly worked. And the other thing is, I forgot. Oh, yeah, it's just worth pointing out. Look at the dates. Charles Crouch was born in 1867. And occasionally to students, I will say, well, my grandfather was born when England was ruled under the 1832 Reform Act. It shows you how recent political history is, and how recent the right to vote, which we all take for granted and people assume has been there since Magna Carta, how recent that process is. And the Second Reform Act came in later in the year 1867, which gave the vote to many working class men, but of course not women as yet. I'll just say a bit about the tea service. When I had sort of first thought about this, I assumed that this thing was the kind of cheapest sort of china that you can buy, and it was kind of my anti-college kind of background made me think, oh well, you know, they only gave them the dregs, and it was the sort of thing that you could buy on Midsummer Fair from a cheap jack when I was a boy. But no, I've had a friend, Sue Ford, who's a conservator and is interested in ceramics, do some research on this, and it's actually something called Copeland. It's spode. It's reasonably well collected. You can find all this sort of thing on eBay. This was a transferware that was made between 1882 and 1890, which fits the dates almost exactly. It's possible that it was made in 1888 from a mark on the bottom. I think that it wasn't used very much, hence most of it surviving. This is yours, Robin, I think.
22 Ainsworth Street. Are you going to show me a picture of it? Lovely.
There it is. You see it. Yeah.
This is something I think my father found when it was up for sale, and he thought it was disgusting. £75,000 for a house in Ainsworth Street. Well, when my grandparents were there, they rented it from Lacon's Brewery, and I think there was a row of houses, Lacon's Brewery, and there was a beer cellar at the end that later the building on the end became a pub called the Molten Hops Inn. And anyway, I think they were quite keen on beer in the Crouch family, from what I hear. But anyway, my older aunt Ada eventually bought the house in 1956, and she paid the magnificent sum of £200 for it, which is quite amazing when you think of today's prices. So yes, 22 Ainsworth Street. Happy memories of visiting Grandma. I was a little bit frightened of her because I was only 3, and her idea of a treat was to go to a cupboard and bring a little bag of raisins or currants for me. No sweets, raisins and currants. Anyway, over to you, Nick.
Yeah, it's worth saying it as you've reiterated that it was a very small house and a very small garden as well. We'll come on to that later. This is Charles in second from the left here, seated with a group of, I assume, other kitchen staff at Trinity College in about 1910. It wasn't a great working environment. Pay was quite low, and it was a patronised position. I mean, the college were like to think of themselves as a paternalistic employer, and Charles and other staff made up their wages by taking advantage of the quite chaotic catering system at the college, and they were allowed to bring home scraps which were vital in feeding their families. Also in the collection are these shoemaking tools. This is a snobbing iron, and it's an iron shape on a wooden column, and boots and shoes were put on there and either sewn or hammered in their repair. And these are a shoemaker's pincers. Now, we assume that these were inherited from Charles's father, and were used by Charles to repair the family's shoes. Robin?
Yeah, well, Charles's father's name was John Crouch. There's a tiny little passageway opposite the Shire Hall, and there's one house there. But when Charles was born, there were two houses. So he was used to living in quite crowded situation. His father, John Crouch, was in the 1914 street directory, says John Crouch was a college servant on cordwainer. Well, cordwainers were probably the best shoemakers there were. Cordwainian leather comes from Spain, and it was rather special. The Crouch family hailed from Buckinghamshire, and looking at the family history, as you went through the years, that they got closer and closer to Cambridge. They were in Emberton, Buckinghamshire, and then I believe they went to Harold in Bedfordshire, then Kimbolton, where Charles was born, and finally ended up in Cambridge. Perhaps Nick would like to say something about the shoe industry and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, in the 19th century, shoemakers were everywhere. Villages had their shoemakers, but it became more factory-based throughout the 19th century in places like Northampton and Northamptonshire, Norwich as well. But Cambridge was a bit different because of the huge market that the university brought. There was still a gap for skilled individual shoemakers rather than ones that wanted to work in a factory or were forced to work in a factory. A lot of the colleges employed their own shoemaking staff, and there seemed to be a lot of work around. And I think that's quite typical of the 19th century. We think always of people going to big industrial cities from the countryside, but it's important to remember the enormous impact that a town like Cambridge, with a huge service industry and particularly huge building projects throughout the 19th century, how that would have been quite a magnet for labour during the 19th century, and the Crouch family were clearly part of that process. Okie doke. Next one. I talked about college paternalism, and they certainly encouraged their staff to take part in sport. And I assume they could play on the college grounds. And Charles, this is him, X marks the spot. Charles played cricket, and he also played rugby. There are a series of photographs of him in college servant teams. I think one of the interesting things like this, again, is how these servants aped their masters and betters, as it were. They're all wearing top hats, except for this wag here, who's acquired an academic mortarboard from somewhere. I think the young lads' hats have seen better days, but you know, Charles is dressed up to the nines there. The other thing I think you can pick out from this photo is that how colleges became employers for whole families. And I think it's almost certain that the two on the end in the standing up row were brothers. They look very similar. The other thing of remark is this man standing on the right, who's blacked up his face, and all I can, we haven't got time to go into the way that, you know, minstrel troops are organised and areas bordering on racism and so on. I think it's in imitation of the famous aristocratic Indian cricketer Ranjit Singhji, who was a Trinity student in the time Charles was working there. He was an Indian prince, the Maharaja of Nawanja, and he was one of the finest batsmen of his day. He played for Cambridge University, Cambridgeshire, Sussex, and England. It's interesting just to compare. Of course, one of the other most famous batsmen of the day was born just round the corner from Sturton Street. Sir Jack Hobbs. He was born. Are you going to tell me, Robin? Milford Terrace, was it? Somewhere like
Norfolk Terrace, yeah.
Norfolk Terrace.
And
Thank
the
you.
Crouches knew the family well.
Yes, I think Aunt Ada had a bit of a friendship with him when she was young. That's it. Next one. Drink was very important to the Victorian working class, none more so, I think, than the Crouches. It's worth just mentioning the way that the brewing interest became very powerful in late Victorian Britain. Brewing, public houses, and so forth were an important part of cultural life and political life, because the brewers were always conservatives. They supported the Conservative Party, and cheap beer was very important in mustering working class support for the Conservative Party. The argument was that the Liberals, the other major political party, were in hock to the nonconformists and wanted to restrict pub opening hours or even close your pub and so forth. It was a very, very powerful very powerful message. This is Charles on the left in this photo. I assume with a couple of friends he went for a drink with. In the middle is his beer glass in which he drank at home. It's got the Trinity College crest in it. And there's also in the collection a wooden cribbage board. And from memory, the Crouches were enthusiastic card players. The other thing is this Church of England Temperance Society pledge, which Aunt Ada, bless her, completed when she was a teenager. And this is her pledge not to touch drink. I think in later life, Aunt Ada did enjoy a tipple and had her own seat at the White Hart, was it?
White Hart.
White Hart, thank you. Yep, next one. I think this is you, Robin.
Is it really? Well, show me it. Oh, yes.
Can you see it?
On the left is the family Bible inscriptions. There's the births, the marriages, and the deaths. We'll come to the latter one later on. My mum being the youngest one, you can't quite see it in the picture. She was born in 1910. Quite a lot of sadness in the Crouch family, but as I say, we'll go into that later. The thing on the right was a commemoration of the great Jubilee of Queen Victoria presented to Auntie Ada. I do have some of her Sunday school prizes as well, with inscriptions on from St Matthew's Church, which is quite lovely, really. Yeah, I'm not sure what else to say about that, Nick.
That's all right. That's all we need to say, isn't it? I mean, they had a lot of children in a very short time.
Yes.
It was a hard life, and Clara worked very hard feeding the family. These are a couple of domestic items from the collection. These are vegetable cutters, which were also used in particular for cutting up suet. And suet was one of the things that could be snaffled from the college kitchen, and very important in these delicious puddings that our mum used to cook, which were very filling, and they were filling because you didn't want too much of the first course if you ate them. It's a very important part of the household economy. The other important part was an allotment, which I assume came through Charlie, their oldest son, who went to work for the Great Eastern Railway, and his younger brother Ted did as well. And the railway company gave allotments, and I suspect it kept the family fed. Patriotism, I think, was quite important to the Crouch family. It went with the drink. It was a whole part of the culture of that part of the working class. This is on the left is a Prattware pot with it's the pot lid we're looking at. It has a white container underneath, which had some all sorts of things were put in it, pomade and tooth powder and things like this. It's clearly of a much earlier or a slightly older generation than Clara and Charles. It's of the old Duke of Wellington, famous general and Prime Minister, who died in 1852, and it's commemorative piece from about the mid-19th century. Where it came from, I don't know. On the right, and I apologise for the photo, I didn't do a particularly good job there, was a badge with a primrose. I think well, I know because I've seen similar ones too. It's a Primrose League brooch. The Primrose League was an organisation, a grassroots organisation, mainly working class, mainly women that belonged to it, that supported the Conservative Party. It's a fairly cheap silver gilt with enamelled flower decorations, and that central primrose is a giveaway. The league was named after Disraeli's favourite flower. But Disraeli, of course, was the late Victorian Conservative Prime Minister. And the Primrose League was a huge organisation. It had about 400,000 members in its heyday. It organised tea and buns, basically. It organised paternalistic activities for working class women. And it was quite important, I think, in the electoral process, because although women at this stage didn't have the vote, women were still involved in the political process, canvassing and so forth. The organisation was very powerful, especially before the First World War. People have written books about it. A very good book by Martin Pugh about it. Next one, Robin.
Okay. This is the Crouch grave in Mill Road Cemetery. It's shortly after we had the Victorian day, a special Victorian day, when we had a black hearse come to the cemetery drawn by horses, a horse-driven hearse. Notice the blue flowers there. I was talking to someone about it, and I said Grandma was a Conservative, and she suggested, the lady I was talking to, I put blue flowers on there. Anyway, Charles Crouch died in 1912. He obviously had worked hard. He'd got 9 children. It couldn't have been an easy life. But there again, when he died, he left my grandmother with 9 children. The oldest child, Maud, left and went into service, but still it left 8. And Grandma took in washing. As she was a tailoress, seamstress, she took in mending from the college. We're not too sure whether she got a pension. I don't think she did. But anyway, she was quite an amazing woman, because she brought up those 8, 9 children just by tailoring and doing the laundry for the college. The picture on the right shows Clara, aged about 40, with my mother sitting on the stool, and Aunt Doris in the front and Aunt Ivy at the back. It's a lovely picture, but you can see a certain sadness in the eyes of Clara, can't you? Okay, Nick.
Thank you. Now, we think she got this weekly allowance from Trinity College, and this is, I think, an important part of the collection. This is an enamel basin, which I assume Charles filled with scraps whilst he was working, and then she was apparently allowed a weekly allowance of beef dripping, and one assumes she went once a week to Trinity College and returned with this, and it helped keep the family fed. Quite a rare survival, I suppose, this basin is.
I do understand that there were 1 or 2 Trinity College plates amongst the family as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Peter told me yesterday.
This postcard, I think, is of a Mothers' Union meeting in St Matthew's Church garden. It's what was behind the long wall going down Vicarage Terrace, was a big house and a big garden. I don't suppose it's there anymore, the house. And the vicar evidently presented these postcards to the participant and wrote on the back, 28th of July 1914, in memory of a pleasant afternoon. And of course, we know now there weren't going to be many pleasant afternoons for the next few years, because the First World War broke out the following week, and that affected the Crouches as much as anybody else in the country. It's a lovely photograph. Clara is in the second row, seated, still wearing black for mourning and a hat, and that's little Ina on her lap there. Sorry, Robin, I interrupted you.
No, that's okay. I was just going to point that out. Carry on.
The Great War, the First World War. Charlie, the oldest son, 19, worked for the railway company. He was in a dilemma because he was the breadwinner, and they were a patriotic family, and he felt he should enlist. And he did enlist. He volunteered early in 1915, and he joined the Suffolk Yeomanry. I better just explain the background. The Yeomanry were the mounted part of the Territorial Army. They had originally been raised in the Napoleonic Wars as home defense troops, but also as paramilitaries to keep working class discontent under control. The Yeomanry were very connected with the countryside. They were meant to be the sons of gentry and the sons of farmers. They provided their own horses, they could ride, and there was a strong connection between the yeomanry and fox hunting. I wrote something about this once. It still is, actually. We don't know how Charlie got accepted into the yeomanry, because as far as I know, he'd never ridden a horse in his life. He was a railwayman from the East End of Cambridge. He didn't, he wasn't part of that world at all. But because the yeomanry and all other military units were desperate for recruits, I think he got taken on. He got taken into what was called the Second Suffolk Yeomanry, who were the holding unit for members of the yeomanry that didn't want to volunteer for active service. They were stationed in this country and effectively were a training unit. That is on here somewhere. They trained in Hertfordshire on the edge of London, is wearing a very smart uniform with boots with spurs, a bandolier, and so off. He clearly was took to soldiering in a big way. Robin.
Yes, sir. Yes, but we're not too sure who this wedding features, apart from the fact we can see Charles Crouch on the front row, second from the right, and Grandma Crouch, Clara, on the left at the back. It may be in Vicarage Terrace, we're not sure. There's a large wall there, but it's quite an early photograph in the First World War, isn't it, Nick?
Yeah, I think it's probably before, whilst Charlie is still in his yeomanry uniform.
Yeah. And
he's wearing a rather jaunty carnation in his cap there. Wartime weddings took place because people, you know, lots, as in the Second World War, people are uncertain what was going to happen. Lots of weddings occurred, but we don't know who these people are. Now, Charlie was left the yeomanry and was transferred to a battalion of the West Kent Regiment and was about to be sent abroad in January 1916 to the Western Front. And we assume he saw an advertisement for people to transfer to the Railway Operating Department, which is part of the Royal Engineers. And as a railwayman, he thought that might be a good opportunity, and it may well have saved his life. The battalion he was posted to was on the Western Front and lost people and so on. To supply the British Army, a vast railway system of narrow gauge railways was created behind the Western Front. And Charlie was posted to that, and he was promoted as a Shunter sergeant. I can't remember the exact title, but the equivalent is sergeant. You can see on the photo at the right how kind of unmilitary some of his comrades were. The man at the back looks as if he ought to be doing a comic turn. I always think, you know, by comparison, Charlie looks very smart. This photo on the left, I'm a bit puzzled about. It may be when he was working for the railways. Two of the people are wearing what could be yeomanry badges on their caps. Here's Charlie on the right-hand side at the back. And clearly they're not a lot of work is being done when it should be here. But it's a lovely photo, and I think gives you an idea of these people were really civilians in uniform, and they were workers in uniform as well, and they were doing the kind of jobs that they were doing in civilian life. There are big advantages to working for the ROD, although, you know, you were under shell fire. The casualties weren't as immense as for the infantry. I think Charlie did lose friends to shell fire, but they were relatively safe behind the lines. They were billeted in French villages, and they met French girls. And Charlie met a young woman called Mari and got very close to her. He didn't forget his family at home, though, and this is part of the collection, a Christmas card in one of these embroidered cards that were produced in their millions in northern France, and you won't be able to read the pencil inscription. It says, "To dear little Ina, wishing you a happy Xmas, fondest love from brother Charlie." There are also these Union Jacks that are part of the collection. Again, we don't know precisely what they were used for. They could have been from wartime. They could have predated the war to be for coronation of Edward VII or something like that. Yep. Walter was the second oldest son, and he was called up in January 1918. The family knew that the war was going in a pretty dismal way. The family next door, by the name of Asby, had already had 2 sons killed. And in that part of Cambridge, there were lots of working class homes that were already in mourning. Walter didn't want to go. He was adamant he wouldn't return, and he ate soap in the attempt to fail his medical. This was a well-known dodge. It was known in the Victorian Army, and it was known right up until the 1950s, the period of as national service was being phased out. The idea was if you ate soap, it would increase your heartbeat, and the doctors would mistake it for palpitations of the heart and therefore turn you down. It wasn't successful in Walter's case. He was a brush maker by trade. We can assume he had little education. But there are surviving letters to his mother within the collection. He trained in the, he went into the machine gun corps, the so-called Suicide Club, whose training centre was at Belton Park near Grantham. It's a National Trust house these days. I believe they've got a display on the machine gun corps there. In one of his letters to Clara, he says, "Oh, I don't mind soldiering in Blighty." He may have had a good time with the mates in his unit. He'd never been away from home before. They were very poor. They didn't travel. This picture on the right, he looks about 14 in it, and he's taken the lining, the metal lining of his cap, and the idea was, you can see it. This is him in the middle of the seated row. The idea was it would make your cap be more comfortable, and you'd look more like a veteran rather than a poor, frightened boy conscript. There's a family story that Walter traveled to France. Charlie was working in a marshalling yard that day, and he was hailed from a coach by Walter, who just arrived in France. Charlie travelled with him to the next stop. He could get back on another train, and Walter was adamant again that he wouldn't be coming back. Clara, meanwhile, was doing everything she could to support her sons. One way was wearing what are called sweetheart brooches. They're fake mother and pearl with fake gilt army badges, about 3 centimetres across. And they were worn by wives, mothers, sweethearts to celebrate their loved ones serving in the forces. Here are the letters Very, very poignant.
Notice the date, 11th of September, the 9th, 11th September, 18.
Yeah.
In the
Robin,
letter,
I think this is you.
In that letter, he says, we've got Jerry on the run. So,
yeah.
So here we come to another tragic incident in the Crouch family. Edward would look after the family allotment, and he was the only wage earner at home. He worked for the railway as a number counter, and after the end of a very hard day, I guess, he would go and look at his allotment and tend to his allotment. One day on the 4th of April in 1918, I guess he was rather tired. He was walking back from the allotment. He greeted a neighbour who was in the signal box next to the allotment, and off he went towards Ainsworth Street along the railway line towards the station. But I reckon he was so tired he wasn't really thinking, and he was walking in the middle of the line. The London Express train came along. The driver saw him. He made his approaching siren thing on the train, but Walter didn't hear him, and unfortunately, age 17, he was run down. He was taken to the railway morgue. His mother wasn't allowed to see him. And the inquest, you can see it on the right, the report of the inquest in the Cambridge Independent. The coroner, summing up, said he concluded by expressing his sympathy with the relatives. And as you can see, the headline said, "Inquest on the only son working for the family." The coroner said the jury returned a verdict of accidental death. And the coroner did say this was purely an accident. But what a dreadful thing to happen to Clara.
And there's no photo of Edward as well.
There's no photo. Yeah, it's a shame. I suppose because the other ones were in the military, they had photos. But there we go. He's also remembered in Mill Road Cemetery.
If things weren't bad enough, Walter was killed on the 18th of October 1918. Here are his medals and the so-called dead man's penny, which was given to the relatives of all First World War casualties. Now, sorry, I'm having technical problems here.
You just need to click to get rid of the.
Yeah, I can't get my. That's better. Sorry about that. There was a shrine to Walter in a corner of the front room at Ainsworth Street, not very much used. Here are some components of it. A framed photo of Walter with in an embossed frame with Kitchener French and Beatty and people and the flags of all the Allies, and this oil painted, which apparently a woman artist would come round door to door and see if anybody had died and painting your lost son or husband to order. There's also this photo of Walter, and there was also a photo of Charlie as well. But as I said, not one of Edward. Wasn't killed serving his country. Yet, you know, he died as a direct consequence of the war. This is the scroll that went with the dead man's penny. and this is a letter that Clara got 2 years after the war, saying that they'd shifted Walter's body. Walter was killed at the end of the war when it was open warfare rather than trench warfare. More than half of those who were killed in trench warfare, as their remains weren't identified. So we are, I suppose, thankful that at least Walter got his own grave near Lucatu, which is a lot further east, away from the trench systems. Charlie, meanwhile, had married Mary, and he formed a new life working for the Imperial War Graves Commission. They had 3 children. Here he is with the eldest boy, Gerard, and there as well. He was clearly a bright man. He spoke French well. He was promoted to a kind of semi-managerial role. He also had a rough time in the Second World War, and the picture on the bottom right is of him in an internment camp at Saint-Denis, just outside Paris. Of course, these were all British citizens, and they were rounded up by the Germans and spent 4 years behind barbed wire, and had a fairly miserable time separated from their families as well. This is the central picture, isn't Charles's wedding, but the wedding of another Englishman who worked for the War Graves Commission, where Charlie was best man. He looks very French. We can't work out if he's wearing spats there or white socks. Ada, their sister, visited Charlie and Mary in France. This is Charlie and Mary on the right there. Here's Ada with Gerard, and Ada visiting Walter's grave. There's this dressing table set, candlesticks and a ring holder and a pot there. And I think it is French in origin. It doesn't look British. There are no marks on it. Clara never visited France, so she never visited Walter's grave. Ada's passport survives, and it was very unusual for working class people in this period to have passports. They simply didn't go abroad. The last slide. Here's Clara just before her death in 1949, and the final estate account from her solicitor, and she left she left nearly £600 equally to all her surviving children. Robin, anything more to add?
Anything more to add? Well, Auntie Ada's, Clara's standing in front of the back window facing the garden. Notice the shutters. I suppose that was wartime shutters, and yes, I sort of remember her. Well, I do remember her, but I was very in awe of her. But my cousin Peter, who's here today, he went to the county school, and he has fond memories of her, of his grandmother teaching him cards. She would often look after him while his parents were out having a good time, and he also visited her every day on his way home from the county school in Hills Road. And he has very fond memories of his grandmother. And what a woman she was, though, bringing up 9 children on tailoring and laundry, and leaving £682. That's pretty good, isn't it? Well, after certain deductions, it was nearly £600. And she was quite a steadfast person, considering the losses she had in her life. She lost her father when she was a child, and her mother remarried and went into the brewing business. Her own natural father was a brewer, publican. He ran the pub on the bridge in Magdalen Street, and then her mother remarried, and that's where she met her husband, in the pub. So yeah, what a woman.
Okay.
Okay. The end.
That was wonderful, Nick and Robin. It was truly, truly wonderful. And there's some amazing things. There's some questions in the chat, and there's some amazing compliments. I'll just read one from iPad 2, which said, "This has been an extraordinary, moving evening. Thank you both so much for the collection. It's amazing." And a few highlights I've put is, I mean, it's such an array of artifacts. And for me, parts of it were like a mini antique roadshow for some of the artifacts you've got. You know, I could feel you both there taking these, and the china really resonated with me, because I remember as a child being on Midsummer Fair, and how they used to bang and do the bidding for the and throw the china at people, didn't they? I don't know how it didn't break, but that really, really resonated with me. So thank you both so much. And I have to say, Nick, your voice sounds exactly like Robin's. If you've got very, very similar sounding voices. So it was an absolute delight. So perhaps now we open it up to everybody now for some questions. And I think, Simon, do you want to pick up? Do you want me to pick up the questions that are in the chat, or are you happy to do that? Or how do you want us to move forward with the questions?
Can we stop screen sharing so we can see each other?
Just getting unmuted there. Yes, so sorry, is it Peter? Yeah, I think you're waving your hand there.
Yes. Yeah. I remember my grandmother very well. I was 17 when she died. When I was young, I used to go and stay there weekends. She taught me to play crib, so that crib board I've played with. Lots of other memories. The more I think about it, since Robin and Nick started this talk, I've thought of more things. It's quite amazing. About a year ago, I found a badge in an army badge in my back garden. I've just looked at it, and it's of the machine gun corps.
Oh, really?
How about that? How about that for a coincidence?
Gosh,
that's amazing, isn't it? Yeah. I have fond memories of my grandmother. She was a wonderful woman. You know, well, you've all seen what she did. This is the days before no family allowance, no supplementary benefit. You know, amazing.
yeah.
Very proud of my grandmother. And
Thank
so
you,
is
Peter.
Robin.
Thank
I
you,
know.
Peter. I believe we have Charlie's daughter with us tonight, Marianne, my cousin. I don't know if you're there, Marianne. I'm sure she could add a few things too.
Oh, I can read the chat.
Gosh, so many people.
So Simon, do you want me to ask some of the questions that are in?
Yeah. Or if you can always just call on the person to ask it in person if it's not obvious. Sometimes it's
Okay,
you lose the context.
So just kind of go through, because I saw some questions early on, which is, well, some really, again, a nice compliment from iPad 2, which is what a class act of 2. You are. I'm loving this. That was early on. So
that's Caro.
There you go. There you go. I've had 2, Caro. Yeah. And not seen vegetables. So Lucy's asking, I wonder if the vegetable cutters. Did the vegetable cutters come from the college, do you think?
It's possible. Someone else has put, I've not seen cutters like this before. I think I have. I used to work in museums, and I think they were, you know, early Victorian. They could be of some age. I mean, they've got lovely turned handles. So I don't think there's anything unusual about that. And they might have come from the college. I think all sorts of things found their way from the college.
Yeah. Okay. Another question is from Tessa. Would Charlie have had some experience of working with horses as a railway man?
That's very interesting. And Marianne and I have discussed this because, you know, she has better memories of her father. We think not. There were horses used in some out of the way railways for shifting railway carriages around, but Cambridge is a mainline station, and things what do you call them? The carriages would be moved around by small shunting locomotive. As far as we're aware, there weren't horses at Cambridge Station that Charlie would have used. And then anyway, there'd have been different sort of horses. These would have been heavy horses rather than the chargers and hunters that the yeomanry would have ridden.
Okay, thank you. There's other things that are just like more comments rather than questions. So should we just ask if anybody likes, I know Lucy's put something about what was in the background, but if you'd like to ask that question, Lucy, or anybody else that's got any other questions, just kind of raise your hand. I'll try and scroll through so that I can see. I can't see any raised hands at the minute, or just unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, I did ask a question. There was a photograph, a family group, or was it a wedding in front of a big wall? And you said, "Is this this could be the vicarage house?" And I was wondering what was on the foreground of that photo. Very
cabbages.
Cabbages.
Cabbages, Lucy. I think it was someone's back garden. If it wasn't Ainsworth Street, it was somewhere around there.
Oh, wonderful! Yeah.
Okay, just a couple of comments just read out from Facebook, because I hadn't realised there's so many coming in here. So we've got a Pat Webber on, who's apparently your second cousin, Robin, and Hamish Adams, who now lives in 22 Ainsworth Street.
Oh yes, I met Hamish the other day. I put a flyer in his door.
Dropping in the leaflet.
And we had
a few others from Ainsworth Street as well. Yeah, and someone from Guardia Street with very similar memories. Okay, no more questions then.
Patricia Pat here, Webber, she's the granddaughter of the eldest daughter of the Crouches, Maud, who left to take up service. And Pat's aunt said to me, her mother used to say, living in that tiny house with 9 children, she was the eldest one, and she just had to get out. She'd had enough of it.
I think there was a certain amount of that with Charlie in the army. You know, I think you know, at the beginning of the war, people didn't know what was going to happen, and young men saw adventure and getting out from all these screaming kids, and I think that was part of it. Joe's put about the some of the yeomanry converted to cyclist battalions. Thank you, Joe, for reminding me of that. They didn't like it. They didn't want to be cyclists. They'd rather be on their horses. They could fox hunt behind the lines. They did. They took foxhounds de France. There were packs of hounds behind the lines, and it was and fox hunting was continued throughout the war and reckoned to be very good training for officers on leave and so forth. They even took packs of foxhounds to the Middle East. They had them in Palestine and places like that, yeomanry regiments that were stationed there.
Amazing.
Mm.
Nick, Robin, I think this has really been an extraordinary evening, and thank you both very much indeed. One of the things that struck me was Clara having to make all those mourning clothes. Would she have had a sewing machine?
I don't know.
I don't know.
I wouldn't have thought so. Peter's shaking his head. I still have my mother's wedding dress at home here from 1935, and Clara made that apparently, and I've shown it to ladies who know about these things, and they said it's very, very, very well made. Perhaps that will end up in the Museum of Cambridge, although I guess they have plenty in there already.
She may not have been able to afford to make formal mourning clothes for all her children, but as you saw in that photo of her with the three youngest, they were all wearing black.
Yeah.
Don't forget that 22 Ainsworth Street didn't have electricity in those days, and she would have done her dressmaking by the light of a paraffin lamp.
Oh gosh.
Of course, yes.
Peter has told me when he was a teenager, schoolboy, Peter has told me that he would play cards in the light of a paraffin lamp as well. So one point I'd like to make is my mother and I think some of my aunts were, it said they married at St Matthew's Church, but opposite the Galdart pub, which is now a recreation ground, and when I was a boy it was a Scout's hut, but before that was St James's Chapel, which was attached to St Matthew's Church, and that's where my mother was married, and I believe some of my aunts were as well. It was a red painted wooden building, and it had like a bell tower on the top. I don't know if anyone remembers that, but they would hold marriages there.
Should we just do there's a couple of questions that are in the chat, which are from Val. How were the foxhounds fed when rations must have been very tight?
Yeah, I think they were fed, well, in France, they were fed horses and things. They'd have been fed horse meat and things like that. I don't know in the UK, but fox hunting was kept up. It was kept up in the Second World War as well. It was regarded as an important part of, training for officers and so forth. It's a bit of a, I've written something on this. If anyone's really interested, I could send you the link to it. They were giving army officers fox hunting leave right up until the 1970s. A month a year they were given off for fox hunting if you're an army officer.
Okay, another little comment here is the photo from Galaxy 6, J6, is the photo of the sergeant shunted was probably taken in an area delegated to the sergeants only. Question.
Yeah, it says sergeants with a tree at the back. You can.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It, but you can read it.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
There was one other comment there, just that the suggestion that if you wanted to know who was in the wedding pictures, then well, they're suggesting blowing up here. That's probably not convenient, but you could put it up on the website or onto the Facebook one of the history groups, because they're usually they quite like trying to find themselves in their and their relatives in the pictures. So, you know, a bit of crowdsourcing to locate some more of the attendees if you're interested.
Brilliant.
Just
Good
to
idea.
follow up on Caro's question about the mourning clothes, you could have them dyed. There were plenty of people who would do that. And so you could just use some clothes that you'd already got.
Lots of people are thanking, lots and lots of thank yous and saying it's been a fascinating talk, which it really has. And lovely to have many of your family members here. And, you know, a really, really great evening. So if everybody's happy, we could kind of give like a round of applause to Robin and Nick and other family members that have all joined us. It's been a great evening. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much. It's really been very special.
I think there's quite a few other relatives of yours have joined on Facebook, looking at the names there.
Jolly good.
The ones you didn't see here are probably there.
I'll check
Okay,
them
well,
out later.
yeah. I think it's probably a good place to wrap up then. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.